Beneath the full moon's unyielding gaze, silver threads wove fate's cruel tapestry, binding the forsaken to the fallen. Mira Lunaris stumbled through the moonlit pass, her boots sinking into the crisp snow that muffled the world's sharp edges. The wind howled like distant wolves, carrying the scent of pine and frost, but it could not drown the echo of rejection still ringing in her ears. At 21, she had been an omega of quiet grace in the Silverfang pack, her days spent tending the hearth fires and weaving herbs under the elder oaks. But whispers of weakness had grown into accusations, her visions, fleeting glimpses of shadows yet to come, deemed curses rather than gifts. Unfit for the pack's strength, the Alpha had snarled during the council, his eyes cold as the glacial rivers below. Banished under the waxing moon, she was left to the wilds, her only possessions a threadbare cloak and a silver locket etched with the crescent of the moon goddess, a relic from her mother, long turned to dust. The pass stretched like a vein of ice through the jagged mountains, its flanks guarded by ancient pines bowed under winter's weight. Mira's breath came in ragged clouds, her body aching from the forced march away from the pack's territory. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but it was the deeper wound that slowed her, the isolation, the knowledge that she was adrift, a shadow among the living. The moon hung high now, full and luminous, casting the snow in a pale, ethereal glow that made the world feel both sacred and forsaken. She paused at a narrow ledge, clutching the locket against her chest, its cool metal a faint anchor. "Goddess," she whispered to the night, "if I am marked for solitude, let it be swift." The wind shifted, carrying a new scent, smoke, mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Mira's instincts sharpened, her omega senses attuned to peril even in exile. She crouched behind a boulder, peering into the gloom. Torchlight flickered ahead, orange flames dancing against the white expanse, illuminating a procession of armored figures on horseback. At their center rode a man whose presence commanded the storm itself. Alpha King Oren Vale, his broad frame clad in a cloak of deep gray fur, edged with ancient gold embroidery that spoke of thrones and burdens. At 44, he was a legend whispered in pack halls, victor of the blood wars, uniter of fractured clans, yet haunted by the ghosts of choices made in shadow. His face, lined with the weight of command, bore eyes like storm clouds, and a faint scar traced his jaw, a reminder of betrayals past. Oren's retinue moved with wary precision through the pass, their breaths syncing with the horses' steady trot. He had come this way seeking alliance with the northern packs, his mind heavy with the guilt of a crown forged in loss. The war had taken his mate years ago, her death a scar that no healing could mend, leaving him to rule with a heart armored in duty. Tonight, under the full moon's watchful eye, he sensed unease, a prickle at the nape of his neck, like the goddess's own warning. The ambush erupted without mercy. Shadows detached from the tree line, assassins cloaked in black, their blades glinting silver in the moonlight, poisoned tips forged to fell even the strongest alpha. Arrows whistled, one grazing Oren's shoulder, drawing a line of crimson that steamed in the cold air. His guards roared, shifting to wolf forms mid-stride, fur rippling over muscle as claws met steel. Chaos bloomed, snarls, the crunch of snow under boots, the wet thud of bodies falling. Mira watched, frozen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She should flee, preserve her fragile freedom. But the locket burned against her skin, the moon's light fracturing through its facets, urging her forward. One assassin broke through. A lithe figure with eyes like voids, lunging at Oren's exposed back. The silver blade arced high, poisoned and lethal, aimed for the king's heart. Time fractured. Mira moved without thought, her body propelled by an unseen force. She surged from her hiding place, the snow flying like shattered glass beneath her feet. "No!" The cry tore from her throat as she threw herself between them. the blade sinking deep into her chest with a sickening whisper. Pain exploded, white-hot and consuming, stealing her breath. She crumpled against Orin, her blood, warm and vital, spilling onto the snow, staining it a deep, accusing red. But as the king whirled, his hand catching her before she fell fully, something impossible unfolded. Instead of pooling dark, a silver light emanated from the wound, ethereal and pulsing, like moonlight made liquid. The assassin recoiled, hissing, as the blade dissolved in Mira's grasp, crumbling to ash. The world hushed. The wind stilled, the howls faded, leaving only the moon's gaze, intense and intimate. Orin's eyes met hers, wide with shock and something deeper, a recognition that clawed at his soul. Her pain mirrored his own buried grief, her sacrifice a thread pulling at the frayed edges of his isolation. "Why?" he rasped, his voice rough as gravel, cradling her as the battle raged on around them, his guards dispatching the last foes. Mira gasped, the silver light weaving through her veins, binding her to him in ways she could not yet fathom. The goddess's touch lingered, not as balm, but as chain, a eternal mate bond forged in the crucible of her blood and his guilt. In that moment, beneath the unblinking moon, exile became entanglement and rejection the first step toward an unforeseen destiny. The pain lingered, a promise of trials yet to come, as the wind resumed its mournful song. The silver light faded as swiftly as it had bloomed, leaving Mira's chest a raw hollow. The wound sealed not by flesh, but by some divine insistence, cool and unyielding. She lay in Orin's arms amid the carnage of the pass. The snow around them churned to slush by fallen bodies and the frantic pawing of horses. The king's guards circled, their wolf forms shifting back to human, breaths heaving like bellows in the frozen air. Blood scented the wind, sharp, coppery, mingling with the acrid smoke of extinguished torches. Orin's face hovered above hers, etched in moonlight, his storm-gray eyes searching her features as if she were a riddle carved in ice. "Who are you?" he demanded again, his voice a low thunder, laced with the authority of one who had commanded armies but now grappled with the inexplicable. His hand pressed against her side, checking for the injury that should have felled her, finding only smooth skin beneath the torn fabric of her cloak. The graze on his shoulder wept red, a shallow furrow that burned like accusation, but it was nothing to the deeper sting in his chest, the instinctive pull toward this stranger, this Omega whose scent now wove through his senses like moonlight through branches. Mira's vision blurred at the edges, the pain receding into a dull throb that echoed the moon's pulse. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the blade that had pierced her, not for the wound, but for the tether she felt snapping into place. It was no mere gratitude, it was a bond, ancient and insistent, humming in her blood like the distant weevo of wolves calling kin. She had seen such things in her visions, fated pairs bound by the goddess's whim, but never imagined herself ensnared in one, especially not with a king whose gaze stripped her bare. "Mira," she whispered, her voice fragile as frost on glass. "Of the Silver Fang pack. Exiled." The word tasted of ash, a reminder of her banishment, the pack's rejection that had driven her into this fatal path. Orin stiffened, recognition flickering in his eyes. Silverfang, the border clan, fractious and fierce, their alpha a rival in the fragile peace he sought. He should distrust her, this sudden savior emerging from the shadows like a specter. Assassins bore the mark of old enemies, whispers of treason from within his own court. But her intervention defied logic. The silver light, impossible, sacred, spoke of the moon goddess's hand, yet it terrified him. Bonds were chains in his world, reminders of loss. His late mate's death in the wars had taught him that love was a vulnerability, not a strength. "Exiled why?" he pressed, helping her to sit as the wind picked up, swirling snowflakes like vengeful spirits around them. She averted her eyes, the locket at her throat catching the moon's gleam, its crescent symbol a quiet defiance. Curiosity warred with her fear. His presence was a storm she wanted to flee, yet it drew her, his scent of pine and aged leather grounding her in the chaos. "Visions," she admitted, the confession slipping out unbidden, born of the bond's insidious pull. "They called them curses. I saw shadows, betrayals." Her gaze flicked to the slain assassins, their black cloaks splayed like broken wings. Had she glimpsed this ambush in her dreams? The thought chilled her deeper than the night. One of his guards approached, a burly beta with a bloodied axe, his face a mask of suspicion. "My king, we must move. More may come." Oren's jaw tightened, the scar along it pulling taut. He nodded. But his hold on Mira lingered, a reluctant anchor. The connection hummed between them, instinctive, raw, like the first spark of fire in endless cold. He felt it in his veins, a warmth that mocked his resolve, urging protection, possession. But he denied it, rationalizing it as shock, as the goddess's cruel jest. She was an omega, broken and alone. He was a king burdened by guilt, his crown heavy with the lives lost under his command. What strength was there in yielding to fate's whim? Mercy, perhaps, but not entanglement. "Bind the wounds," Oren ordered his men, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. He rose, pulling Mira with him, her slight frame leaning into his solidity before she caught herself and stepped back, fear flashing in her eyes. The bond tugged, insistent, but she resisted, wrapping her arms around herself as if to sever it. Who was this man to claim her sacrifice? She had acted on impulse, not destiny, driven by the locket's inexplicable heat, the moon's silent command. Yet curiosity burned. His melancholy aura mirrored her own exile, a shared fracture beneath the regal facade. They pressed on through the pass, the retinue reforming with wary glances at the newcomer. Snow fell heavier now, veiling the bloodied trail, the moon a silent witness overhead. Mira walked at the rear, her steps faltering, the silver residue in her blood a faint glow under her skin, visible only to her. Oren's horse slowed beside her, his shadow long and protective. "You saved my life," he said quietly, the words heavy with unspoken debt. But bonds like this, they demand more than gratitude. She met his gaze then, the wind whipping her hair like dark banners. Fear and curiosity twisted within her, a king's guilt, her own rejection, the goddess's silver thread binding them in pain's forge. "And if I deny it?" she challenged, her voice a whisper against the storm. The question hung, philosophical and raw. Was strength in resistance, or in the mercy of acceptance? The pass narrowed ahead, shadows deepening into a sheltered hollow where torchlight could ward off the encroaching night. But the bond whispered promises of trials, the moon's light fracturing on fresh snow, illuminating paths neither could yet see. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The hollow cradled them like a forgotten prayer, its walls of jagged rock etched with veins of ice that gleamed under the moon's relentless scrutiny. Mira followed the retinue into the shelter, the wind's howl fading to a muffled sigh as they crossed the threshold. Torches sputtered to life, their flames casting elongated shadows that danced like wary specters across the cavern floor. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and smoldering pine, a fragile barrier against the storm brewing beyond. Oren's guards posted sentries at the entrance, their breaths visible in the chill, while the king dismounted with a grace born of weary command, his cloak shedding snow like shed regrets. Mira lingered at the edge, her body a map of aches, the phantom sting in her chest where the blade had kissed her flesh, now a cool pulse of silver beneath her skin. The bond thrummed, a subtle vibration that synced with her heartbeat, pulling her gaze inexorably to Oren. He moved among his men, issuing orders in a voice like grinding stone, binding his shoulder wound with strips of cloth-stained crimson. Guilt shadowed his features, not just for the ambush, but for the weight he now imposed on her, this Omega who had shattered the night with her sacrifice. She should have been a ghost in the pass, not a chain around his soul. What was redemption if it came laced with such entanglement? He met her eyes across the fire's glow, a flicker of melancholy in his storm-gray depths, and looked away, rationalizing the pull as the goddess's fleeting mercy. She sank onto a ledge, drawing her knees close, the locket's crescent warm against her throat like a secret heartbeat. Exile had taught her solitude's bite, but this bond was a deeper wound, instinctive, invasive, whispering of futures she had no claim to. Visions had always been her curse, fragments of peril that the pack had branded as weakness, yet tonight they felt like harbingers. Had she foreseen this king in her dreams, his scar a silver thread through the dark? Fear coiled tighter than curiosity now. He was power incarnate, his guilt a chasm she dared not bridge. Yet empathy stirred, unbidden. His isolation mirrored her own, a king adrift in duty's cold embrace. The night deepened, the moon's light filtering through a crack in the ceiling like a blade of judgment. Conversation among the guards turned to murmurs of treason. The assassins' cloaks bore no clan marks, but their silver blades whispered of the Ironclaw rebels, old foes from the blood wars who chafed under Oren's fragile peace. Mira listened, her senses sharpening. The bond, amplifying every nuance, the low rumble of Oren's voice, the scent of his blood mingling with the fire's smoke. She traced the locket's edges, its metal a talisman against the rising dread. Strength lay not in isolation, she thought, but in choosing connection amid the fracture. Or was that merely the bond's deceit? A sentry's alarm shattered the fragile calm, a low growl echoing from the pass, followed by the crunch of snow under deliberate steps. "More come," the beta barked, axe in hand, as shadows coalesced at the hollow's mouth. Not assassins this time, but wolves, 3 hulking forms bursting from the tree line, eyes glowing amber in the moonlight, their fur matted with frost and fury. Ironclaw scouts, driven by the ambush's echo, seeking the king's head to ignite old flames. They shifted mid-leap, massive paws tearing earth, jaws snapping with the promise of vengeance. Chaos erupted anew. Oren's guards met them head-on, steel clashing against fang, the cavern ringing with snarls and the wet rip of flesh. One wolf barreled past the line, its bulk slamming into a torch, sending embers spiraling like fallen stars. It lunged for Oren, who had drawn his sword, a broad blade etched with ancient runes, its edge catching the firelight in a deadly gleam. He parried, muscles straining, but the beast's claws raked his thigh, drawing blood that steamed on the stone. Pain flared in Mira's chest, an echo of his wound through the bond, sharp as her own silver scar. She rose, heart pounding, the locket burning hot now, as if the moon itself urged her forward. Instinct overrode fear. Mira snatched a fallen dagger from the floor, its hilt rough against her palm, and hurled herself into the fray. The wolf wheeled toward Oren again, jaws wide, but she struck first, driving the blade into its flank with a force she didn't know she possessed. Hot blood sprayed, deep red against the white of her cloak, its coppery tang filling her nostrils. The beast howled, a sound like tearing wind, and turned on her, yellow eyes locking with hers in primal rage. Mira dodged, the cavern's chill biting her skin, but it pinned her against the wall, breath hot and fetid. Oren was there in an instant, his sword cleaving through the air with a whistle. The blade sank into the wolf's neck, severing life in a gush of crimson that painted the stone. It crumpled, lifeless, and Oren pulled Mira to him, his arm an iron band around her waist. Their breaths mingled, ragged and synced, the bond surging like a tide. empathy blooming into something visceral, a shared pulse amid the blood and fire. His eyes searched hers, not with command but with raw vulnerability, the king's melancholy cracking to reveal the man beneath. "You fight for me," he murmured, voice rough with awe and denial, his free hand brushing a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering on the warmth of her skin. She trembled, not from cold, but from the intimacy of it, the way his guilt intertwined with her rejection, forging a refuge not in stone, but in mutual guard. The last wolf fell to the guard's blades, its body twitching in the embers, the cavern falling silent, save for the crackle of flames and distant weavos fading into the night. Mira leaned into him, just for a moment, the silver light in her veins humming in harmony with his heartbeat. Curiosity had twisted into need, fear into fierce protection. The bond was no longer a chain, but a hearth, warming the fractures of their souls. Yet resistance lingered. He pulled back first, rationalizing it as duty, she as folly. What was love, if not this reluctant mercy born in the heat of shared peril? The fire popped, casting their shadows long and entwined, the moon's gaze softening as if in benediction. Outside, the storm whispered of greater threats, but within the hollow, a fragile alliance took root, empathy's quiet bloom amid the bloodied snow. The embers glowed like dying stars in the hollow's heart, their faint crackle the only counterpoint to the heavy silence that followed the fray. Mira pulled away from Oren slowly, her skin still tingling where his touch had lingered, a warmth that defied the cavern's chill. Blood flecked her cloak, the wolf's crimson a stark accusation against the pale fabric, and she wiped her hands on the stone, the metallic scent clinging to her like a shadow. The bond pulsed between them now, no longer a distant hum, but a living current, threading her fear into his resolve, her curiosity into his guarded melancholy. She met his gaze across the fire, seeing not the king but the man, scarred by wars he could not unmake, his eyes reflecting the same fracture she carried from her exile. Oren turned to his guards, his voice steady as he assessed the wounded. "Secure the perimeter. Dawn will bring clearer paths, but trust no shadow." The betas nodded, dragging the fallen wolves' bodies to the entrance, their forms limp and steaming in the cold. He approached Mira then, kneeling beside her with a deference that belied his crown, offering a waterskin etched with runes of protection. "Drink," he said, his tone laced with the quiet authority of one who had learned to command not just armies, but the remnants of his own heart. The graze on his thigh wept steadily, staining his breeches dark, yet he ignored it, his focus on her, the Omega who had twice now stood as his shield. She took the skin, her fingers brushing his, and the contact sent a shiver through her, silver light flickering faintly beneath her skin like veins of moonlight. Exhaustion weighed her limbs, but sleep evaded her, chased by the bond's insistent whisper. Visions had always come unbidden, fragments of peril that twisted her nights into labyrinths, but tonight they stirred deeper, stirred by the silver scar in her chest. It was no mere wound, it was a key turning in the lock of her soul. "The iron claw," she murmured, handing back the skin, her voice a thread in the dim. "They seek more than your life. I saw it." The words escaped before she could cage them, born of the empathy that now bound her to him, making his burdens her own. Oren's brow furrowed, the scar along his jaw catching the fire's glow, pulling taut as he studied her. Guilt shadowed his features, the weight of old betrayals, the blood war's endless cycle of vengeance, where his unification had left scars deeper than any blade. He had lost allies to Ironclaw's rage, his late mate among them, her death a pyre that still smoldered in his dreams. "Saw it," he echoed, his voice low, probing the edges of her confession. Rationality warred with instinct. He should dismiss her as a traumatized exile, yet the bond urged truth, pulling at the frayed edges of his denial. What was destiny, if not the cruel alignment of such fragile threads? Mira nodded, drawing the locket from beneath her collar, its crescent symbol pulsing with an inner light that matched the scar's glow. The moon's beam pierced the cavern's crack above, bathing it in silver, and the air thickened, charged as before a storm. Not clearly, not always, she admitted, her breath visible in the chill, carrying the faint scent of herbs from her lost pack life. Glimpses, shadows in the pass, blades under moonlight, the goddess. She marks me with them. They called it a curse, banished me for it. But tonight, when I took the blade, her hand pressed to her chest, and the silver light bloomed anew, not as pain, but as revelation, spilling from her fingertips like liquid starlight. It wove through the air, forming ethereal threads that danced toward Oren, touching his wounds with a cool, healing touch. The gash on his thigh knit slowly, crimson fading to pink, the ache easing as if the moon itself mended what war had torn. He inhaled sharply, the bond surging with visceral clarity. Her gift, not just visions, but this luminous power, a pathfinder's grace hidden in an Omega's exile. The silver light revealed fragments to him now, unbidden. Flashes of Ironclaw's lair in the northern crags, a traitor in his own court whispering secrets to the rebels, a greater ambush brewing under the next full moon. Oren's eyes widened, storm-gray depths reflecting the glow, recognition dawning like dawn over ice. She was no mere savior. She was the key, the moon goddess's chosen vessel. Her rejection a forge for this destiny that now entangled them both. Guilt twisted deeper, not for his past, but for drawing her into his shadowed throne. Pathfinder, he breathed, the ancient title slipping from his lips, a legend from the old scrolls, Omegas touched by the goddess, seers who lit the way through betrayal's veil. His hand covered hers, steadying the light as it faded, their palms warm against the cold stone. You are more than exile. You see what I cannot, the threads that bind our fates. Mira's heart raced, the manifestation leaving her drained, yet empowered, the bond transforming fear into purpose. The locket cooled against her skin, its crescent a symbol of rebirth amid rejection. She had always hidden this gift, rationalizing it as weakness. But in his gaze, it became strength, a moral compass in the storm of power and compassion. Philosophy stirred in the quiet. What was faith, if not embracing the divine burden? Yet resistance lingered. This revelation chained her further to a king whose melancholy mirrored her own despair, promising not ease but trials. It comes at a cost, she whispered, pulling her hand away gently, the silver residue lingering like frost on their skin. Visions of blood, of choices that scar. If I am your key, what lock do I open? War, or something redemptive? Oren rose, his silhouette towering against the fire, the healed wound a testament to her power, yet his expression etched with the king's eternal duty. The guards watched from afar, their murmurs hushed, sensing the shift in the air, the spiritual weight of the moon's blessing. Outside, the wind howled anew, carrying distant weavos that echoed the unfolding destiny. He extended a hand, not in command, but in alliance, his voice rough with the melancholy of one who had long denied such bonds. The lock to truth, he said, eyes locking with hers, the silver light reflected in their depths. But truth demands sacrifice. We face it together, or not at all. The cavern seemed to hold its breath, the moon's gaze intensifying through the crack, illuminating the locket's gleam and the faint scar on her chest. Empathy had forged their refuge, but revelation now ignited it, the bond aflame against the encroaching dark. Mira hesitated, then took his hand, the connection sealing with a quiet spark, love as proof, not prize, in the forge of shared fate. The night deepened, whispers of greater confrontations stirring in the shadows as the goddess's threads wove tighter, promising judgment under the lunar throne. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw you're the moon, hung like a judge's gavel over the crags, its silver verdict casting long shadows across the frozen trail that snaked toward the Ironclaw border. Mira rode behind Oren on his steed, the horse's flanks heaving with the rhythm of their urgent flight, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist to steady against the wind's relentless lash. The bond thrummed between them, a silver vein pulsing with shared resolve, yet laced with the ache of unspoken fractures. Dawn had broken gray and unforgiving, revealing the pass's scars, churned snow stained with the night's blood, the distant weavos of pursuing scouts fading into the gale. Oren's guards flanked them, their breaths sinking with the creak of leather and steel, but tension coiled in the air like smoke from a hidden pyre. The revelation in the hollow had ignited purpose, Mira's pathfinder light unveiling the traitor's shadow. Lord Aemon, Oren's once trusted advisor, whose whispers fed Ironclaw's flames, trading secrets for a rival's crown. Mira's cheek pressed against Oren's back, the scent of his fur cloak, pine and faint blood grounding her amid the sway. The locket nestled between them, its crescent warm as a heartbeat, a talisman that now felt like a brand. Her gift had stirred visions in the night's vigil. Aemon's face, gaunt and ambitious, plotting in torchlit chambers. Alpha Thorn of Ironclaw, his rival's eyes burning with the old war's grudge, rallying wolves under banners of vengeance. But deeper still, fragments of her own past pierced the haze. Silverfang's council fires, the Alpha's snarl branding her visions as omens of doom, her banishment a ritual casting her into the wilds like chaff on the wind. Rejection's sting resurfaced, sharp as fresh frost, whispering that this bond was no salvation, but another exile, chaining her to a king's shadowed throne. What freedom was there in illuminating paths that led to more blood? She rationalized the pull, telling herself it was duty's echo, not love's insidious bloom. Yet her fingers tightened on his cloak, betraying the empathy that now wove their souls. Oren guided the horse with a steady hand, his body a bulwark against the storm, but his mind churned like the clouds above. Guilt was his constant shadow, heavier now with Mira's light revealing not just betrayal, but his own complicity, the fragile peace he had forged after the blood wars, built on compromises that sowed dissent. Aemon had been his brother's kin, a bond of blood turned to poison by ambition. Thorn, the Ironclaw Alpha, a warrior whose mate Oren had slain in battle, a death that haunted his dreams with crimson echoes. The Pathfinder's visions confirmed the snare, an ambush at the border ford where river ice cracked under hidden claws designed to end his reign and shatter the clan's uneasy union. He felt Mira's warmth against him, the bond urging protection, a melancholy tide eroding his resolve. Love as redemption? It mocked him, this eternal tether forged in her sacrifice, demanding he choose between the crown's iron mercy and the war that might free her from his burdens. "We confront them at the ford," he said over his shoulder, voice rough as grinding ice, carrying to the guards. "No retreat. The goddess lights our way." The trail descended into a ravine, where the river snarled between banks of jagged stone, its surface a treacherous mirror of fractured moonlight despite the day's pallor. Snow whipped in furious spirals, stinging Mira's face like accusatory needles, the wind carrying the metallic tang of water and impending violence. They crested the final rise, and there it unfolded. Ironclaw's vanguard, 24 wolves in hybrid forms, fur rippling over armored hides, eyes gleaming amber under Thorn's command. At their flank stood Aemon, dismounted and cloaked in treason's gray, his face a mask of false loyalty as he raised a hand in mock parley. Banners snapped in the gale, crimson fields emblazoned with iron claws, while behind them Silverfang scouts lurked in the tree line, their scents familiar to Mira, a bitter homecoming laced with betrayal. Her old alpha, Harlan, had sent them, no doubt bartering her vision's worth for alliance with the rebels, turning her exile into a pawn's gambit. Oren's horse reared as arrows whistled, one embedding in a guard's shield with a thud that echoed Mira's pounding heart. "Hold!" Oren bellowed, dismounting in a fluid surge, his sword drawn, runes glowing faintly silver in response to the bond. The retinue formed a line, steel glinting against the white expanse, but Thorn stepped forward, his massive frame shifting fully to wolf, a low growl rumbling like thunder over the river. Aemon flanked him, eyes darting to Oren with feigned regret. "Brother in arms," the traitor called, voice oily as spilled blood. "Your unification crumbles. Step down and spare the pack's more war. The Omega's light blinds you. Curses, not gifts." Mira slid from the horse, her boots crunching snow, the locket igniting with inner fire as fear twisted into fury. The Silverfang scouts emerged, Harlan at their head, his gaze locking on her with cold recognition. "Traitors spawn," he snarled. "Your visions sow chaos. Join us, or die with the false king." The words struck like claws, reopening the wound of rejection. Her pack's faith shattered, her gifts twisted into weapons for their gain. Pain bloomed in her chest, silver light flickering erratically, illuminating flashes. Harlan's pact with Aemon, visions bartered for power, her banishment a calculated discard. The bond surged, Oren's guilt mirroring her despair. His hand finding hers in the fray's onset, a silent vow amid the chaos. Wolves lunged, the ford erupting in snarls and splashes, ice shattering under paws as steel met fang. Oren cleaved through two ironclaw beasts, blood arcing red against the snow, his movements a dance of melancholic precision, each strike weighed by the lives it claimed. Mira dodged a Silverfang lunge, her dagger flashing. But Thorn barreled toward Oren, jaws wide, the river's roar drowning all but the bond's frantic pulse. She threw herself forward, silver light erupting from her palms like lunar blades, searing the air and forcing the Alpha back with a yelp of ethereal burn. Aemon struck then, his poisoned knife glancing Oren's arm, but Mira's vision guided her. She intercepted, the blade grazing her shoulder, drawing a line of crimson that steamed silver. The battle crested in visceral fury, howls piercing the wind, the river churning pink with blood, fire from a guard's torch igniting a wolf's fur in a brief, hellish blaze. Harlan circled Mira, his eyes pleading beneath the rage. "Freedom, child, leave the king's chains. Forgive our doubt, reclaim your place." The choice clawed at her. Love's burden with Oren, a redemption forged in shared scars, or the pack's hollow liberty, forgiving their rejection for war's false peace. Philosophy burned in the cold. What was compassion, if not sparing the blade for mercy's sake, even when it demanded her soul's fracture? Oren felled Thorn with a roar, the rival crumpling into the river's maw. But Aemon fled into the tree line, his betrayal a shadow yet unbroken. Harlan lunged at Mira one final time, but she raised her hand, silver light weaving a barrier that halted him, not in death, but revelation, visions flooding him of his own downfall, pacts unraveling like frost in sun. He staggered back, eyes wide with dawning guilt, the pack faltering around him. Oren reached her side, bloodied and breathless, his hand cupping her face, the bond a torrent of empathy and choice. "End it," he urged, voice raw. "War or forgiveness, your light decides." Mira trembled, the locket's crescent blazing, wind howling her dilemma, power's compassionate crown, or freedom's isolating gale. The moon's gaze weighed them, the river's blood a testament to paths diverged, as faith warred with despair in the forge of her heart. The choice hung, eternal and unforgiving, the silver scar pulsing with the weight of what might yet be sacrificed. The river's roar swallowed the last echoes of snarls, leaving only the wind's mournful keen and the faint crackle of embers from a discarded torch, its flames licking at the snow like desperate tongues. Mira stood frozen in the ford's crimson churn, her hand outstretched, silver light coiling from her fingertips like ethereal smoke, holding Harlan at bay. The Silverfang Alpha's eyes, once a pillar of her world's unyielding order, now mirrored fractured ice, reflections of the visions she had forced upon him, his pacts crumbling, Ironclaw's false alliance devouring his pack in flames of betrayal, a future where rejection seeds bloomed into annihilation. Blood trickled from her shoulder, warm and insistent, mingling with the river's icy bite, but it was the deeper tear in her soul that bled, the confrontation with her past, raw and unyielding under the moon's impartial gaze. Oren remained at her side, his presence a steadfast shadow, his sword lowered but grip iron tight, the runes along its blade dimmed to a faint silver pulse that echoed her own scar. His breath came ragged, the bond transmitting the storm within him. Guilt's heavy tide, crashing against the shores of duty and desire. The battle had exacted its toll. Guards slumped against the banks, their wounds steaming in the cold. Ironclaw remnants scattered into the tree line, their howls fading like defeated prayers. Aemon's flight lingered as a thorn, the traitor's shadow promising unfinished reckonings, but here, in this bloodied crux, the past demanded judgment. Oren's hand hovered near hers, not touching, respecting the precipice she balanced upon. His melancholy eyes, storm-gray and etched with the war's indelible marks, held no command, only the quiet plea of one who knew the cost of choices forged in loss. "Mira," he murmured, voice rough as frost-rimed stone, "the light is yours. Let it guide, not consume." Harlan staggered forward a step, the silver barrier shimmering like moonlight on water, its cool luminescence illuminating the scars of his own regrets, the lines around his eyes from nights spent doubting the pack's path, the tremor in his claws from bartering her gifts for fleeting power. "Daughter of the Moon," he rasped, the title a reluctant olive branch, laced with the bitterness of his earlier scorn. "We were blind, your visions. They warned of this chaos, and we cast you out like weakness. Forgive us. Return. Lead Silverfang from the brink." The words hung in the gale, a moral snare, forgiveness as a chain to her old world, freedom's illusion wrapped in the pack's hierarchical embrace. Mira's heart clenched, the locket at her throat burning like a forge's heart, its crescent symbol fracturing the light into prisms that danced across the river's surface. Rejection had been her exile's blade, severing her from kin, from purpose. But now it returned, demanding she choose between the familiar cage of compassion's half measure or the unbound wilds of love's uncharted burden. The wind whipped snow from the banks, stinging her face like accusatory whispers, carrying the scent of blood and pine, the distant weevo of fleeing wolves a dirge for what might have been. Visions cascaded through her then, unbidden and vivid, the Pathfinder's gift surging in response to the bond's insistent hum. Flashes of Silverfang's hearths, warm but shadowed by Harlan's ambition. A future where she returned, her light twisted into their wars, perpetuating the cycle of betrayal that had claimed her mother's life. And woven through it all, Oren. His guilt a mirror to her despair, his ethical core a quiet fire that had withstood thrones and tempests. The eternal mate bond thrummed, not as sweet promise but as proof's harsh forge, demanding she weigh power against mercy. What was strength, if not the grace to forgive without surrender, to love without possession? Faith warred with the despair of her banishment's echo, the silver scar in her chest pulsing like a second heart, urging renascimento from the ashes of old wounds. She lowered her hand, the light dissolving into wisps that evaporated on the breeze, leaving Harlan kneeling in the snow, his form diminished, eyes downcast in the weight of revelation. "I forgive you," Mira said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her core, carrying over the river's murmur like a lunar incantation. "Not for your throne, but for the pack's soul." Turn from this path, Harlan, before the goddess's judgment claims what mercy spares. The words were her choice, moral and visceral. Compassion over vengeance, freedom in release rather than war's crimson crown. Harlan nodded, broken but unbowed, signaling his scouts to withdraw, their forms melting into the tree line like shadows yielding to dawn. No blades drawn in finality, only the quiet unraveling of ties, her rejection transmuted into a bridge, however fragile. But the victory tasted of ash. Amon's betrayal lingered, a specter in the wind, and Thorn's death in the river's depths stirred the clan's old feuds. Whispers of greater confrontation brewing in the northern holds. Oren turned to her fully then, his hand finally claiming hers, fingers interlacing with a gentleness that belied his warrior's frame. The contact ignited the bond anew, silver light flickering between their palms, healing the graze on her shoulder with a cool whisper, yet amplifying the ache of what lay ahead. His face, lined with the melancholy of a king who had sacrificed kin to peace, softened in the moment's intimacy. The wind tousling his hair, snowflakes catching in his lashes like unshed tears. "You chose mercy," he said, voice low and resonant, laced with awe and the shadow of his own unresolved guilt. "But it binds us deeper. The traitor flees to my court. We must face him there, under the moon's full witness. Love. It demands we walk this path together, not as king and omega, but as equals in the forge." Mira met his gaze, the river's bloodied flow a stark canvas beneath the moon's rising arc, its light gilding the crags in ancient gold and deep blue shadows. Empathy surged through the bond, her rejection's fracture aligning with his duty's burden, birthing not ease but a shared resolve, redemption as trial, not triumph. Fear of the coming judgment coiled in her belly, sharp as the wind's bite, yet curiosity bloomed into fierce acceptance. Destiny, not as chain, but as chosen flame. The locket cooled against her skin, its crescent a symbol of paths diverged and reclaimed, as distant howls rose in answer to the night's unfolding decree. They mounted once more, the retinue reforming with weary precision, the ford's ice cracking faintly under the horses' hooves like the first fissures in a thawing world. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks veiled in storm clouds, promising the court's shadowed halls where Amon's treachery awaited its reckoning. Mira leaned into Oren's back, the rhythm of the ride sinking their breaths, the silver scar a quiet vow amid the encroaching dusk. Choice had been made, but its weight pressed like unseen claws, faith's fragile light against despair's encroaching tide, love's proof in the face of sacrifice yet to come. The moon watched, unblinking, as the wind carried them toward the heart of judgment, where blood and fire would test the bonds of flesh and fate. The throne hall of Vale Keep loomed like a cavern hewn from ancient ice, its vaulted ceilings lost in shadows where torchlight flickered like hesitant stars against walls of gray stone veined with frost. The full moon's gaze pierced through high slits, bathing the dais in silver that pooled on the flagstones, turning the air thick with the scent of smoldering pine and the faint, underlying tang of blood from the road's trials. Mira stood at Oren's side, her hand clasped in his, the bond a steady thrum that wove their pulses into one, her silver scar pulsing in harmony with his heartbeat, a reminder that this union was no gentle dawn, but a forge reborn from pain's unyielding fire. The court's assembly murmured like wind through pines, betas in steel-gray tunics, elders with eyes shadowed by the blood war's ghosts, all gathered under the weight of impending judgment. Amon's treachery had rippled through the keep like poison in a vein, scouts confirming his flight here, barricaded in the inner sanctum, his ambitions laid bare by Mira's visions. Oren's grip tightened, his broad frame a bastion against the chill that seeped from the stones. Yet his melancholy lingered, a storm cloud in his eyes. Guilt had been his crown's shadow since the wars, mates lost, clans fractured by his hand in the name of unity. But Mira's light had illuminated the fractures, forcing him to confront not just Aemon's blade, but the mercy he had long denied himself. She felt it through the bond, his ethical core cracking under the burden. Power's compassionate yield, or the despair of endless retribution? Her own rejection echoed in the hall's vastness. Silverfang's banishment a distant howl, Harlan's humbled retreat a fragile mercy she had granted. Yet it left her adrift, her Pathfinder gift a double-edged flame that burned away illusions but scorched the soul. The locket at her throat warmed, its crescent etching a quiet vow against her skin, symbol of the goddess's weave. Rebirth not as erasure, but as scars transmuted into strength. The great doors groaned open, admitting Aemon under guard, his gaunt frame shackled in silver chains that gleamed like accusations in the moonlight. His eyes, once sharp with false counsel, now darted like cornered prey, landing on Oren with a mix of defiance and desperation. "My king," he began, voice oily as spilled venom, bowing low but without sincerity. The Ironclaw whispers were lies, Thorn's madness, not mine. Spare me, and I reveal their deeper plots. The lie hung heavy, stirring Mira's visions. Flashes of Aemon's midnight pacts, gold traded for blades, his ambition a spark that could ignite the fragile peace into war's inferno. The assembly shifted, murmurs rising like weavos on the wind, the air charged with the moral precipice, execution for betrayal, or compassion's risk, freeing a serpent in mercy's name. Oren stepped forward, his cloak whispering against the stone, the scar along his jaw catching the moon's gleam like a blade's edge. "You sold our unity for a rival's throne," he said, voice resonant and raw, carrying the weight of 44 winters marked by loss. "My brother's bloodkin, yet you wielded guilt as your weapon, twisting my doubts into daggers." The bond surged, Mira's empathy flooding him, her own exile's pain mirroring his, urging not vengeance, but the healer's touch. She moved with him, her free hand pressing to her chest, where the silver scar bloomed faintly, light seeping through her fingers like liquid moonlight. The hall hushed, breath sinking with the distant wind's moan, as her gift manifested fully. Visions not just for her, but projected in ethereal threads that wove through the air, illuminating Aemon's treasons for all to see, sealed letters, shadowed meetings, the Riverford's ambush born of his whispers. Aemon recoiled, chains rattling, his face paling to ash under the revelation's glare. "Witch's curse!" he spat, lunging against his bonds, but guards pinned him, the assembly gasping as the light touched them too, fragments of hope amid the dark, clans healing under true unity, the goddess's favor turning war's blood to fertile snow. Mira's body trembled, the effort draining her like fire's fierce kiss, pain lancing through the scar as if the blade pierced anew. Yet in the bond, Oren's strength bolstered her, his hand a anchor, their shared resolve a quiet philosophy. What was faith, if not choosing compassion's light over power's devouring flame? Aemon crumpled, not in death, but defeat, tears carving tracks in the grime of his cheeks. "Mercy," he whispered, the word a broken howl as the vision stripped him bare, revealing not just guilt, but the despair of a man fractured by ambition's isolation. Oren's jaw tightened, the king's melancholy fracturing into resolve. He raised his hand, not for the executioner's axe, but in reprieve. "Exile," he declared, voice echoing like thunder over the crags. "To the wild borders, under the moon's watch, betray again, and no light will spare you." The assembly bowed, a wave of silvered heads, the air lightening as if the goddess herself exhaled. Aemon was dragged away, his form diminished in the shadows, leaving the hall in a hush broken only by the fire's soft crackle and the wind's approving sigh. But the choice's cost lingered. Mira swayed, the light fading, exhaustion claiming her like winter's deep sleep. Orin caught her, cradling her against his chest, the bond igniting in a final visceral surge. Silver light weaving from her scar to his wounds, healing not just flesh, but the deeper rifts, his guilt dissolving in her compassion's balm, her rejection reborn as destined union. In that embrace, beneath the moon's benediction, Renascimento unfolded. Not sacrifice's end, but healing's quiet union. Love as the ultimate proof, forging them eternal. Mira's eyes met his, storm-gray depths now warmed by faith's flame, the locket's crescent pulsing between them like a shared heart. "We are bound," she whispered, voice soft as snowfall, "not in chains, but in choice, redemption's path, walked together." Orin nodded, his lips brushing her forehead, the melancholy lifting like mist before dawn, their scents mingling, pine, blood, and silvered hope, as the hall faded into intimate silence. Outside, the mountains stood sentinel, snow veiling old scars, the wind carrying weavos of distant packs, yielding to the new era. Destiny had revealed itself not as burden, but as freedom's compassionate crown, the eternal mate bond sealed in the forge of moral fire, where despair bowed to rebirth's unyielding light. The moon dipped toward the horizon, its silver thread weaving their fates into the tapestry of night, promising trials yet, but no longer alone. Love's redemptive proof, eternal and unbroken. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.